So, hello again. Today in this screencast, I will talk you through the subtopic C1 and also most of C2 of the ecology and conservation option. So, if we start off by taking a look at what the guide says about the subtopic C1, which is called species and community. Then there is the essential idea up here that a community structure is an emergent property of an ecosystem. So we'll come back to this little word here in a minute because I want to make sure that you actually understand what this means. But if we just quickly run through the understandings and the applications and skills, then hopefully you'll see that we have covered all of this now. So the distribution of species is affected by limiting factors. We have looked at this. We've seen maps of the world for coral reefs and for the oak trees, the deciduous oak trees, and saw that they were limited by temperature, both of these species. We have talked about keystone species and how they affect the community that they're part of, especially if they are removed from the ecosystem. You should also by now know that each species plays a unique role within a community because of, as it says here, unique combination of its spatial habitat, so where it lives, and also the interactions that it has with other species in the area. We've talked about all these different types of interactions: predation, mutualism, competition, parasitism, all these, and that how they can be classified according to the effect they have on the species involved in the interaction. And we have also seen that two species cannot survive indefinitely in the same habitat if their niches are identical. And we have looked at like the coral animal and deciduous oak tree to illustrate limits of tolerance and zones of stress. And you have been outside taking pictures to show local examples of different types of interactions between species. We have talked about the Zooxanthellae, the algae that lives inside the coral. And you have analyzed data, especially the paramecium data, all the different graphs to show something about fundamental and realized niche, and also the barnacles that grew on the cliffs near the shore. We've looked at those. And you have been outside and performed a transect analysis. And in your report, you'll be analyzing the distribution of then a plant species and some abiotic factor of your own choice. But just to make sure that you get what emergent property means. An emergent property is something that systems get when they sort of become systems, when you put pieces together to form a system. So for instance, when you put together all the different organelles to form a cell, then the cell would have emergent properties that the different organelles do not have on their own. And it's the same if you put different cells together to form an organ like a heart, then that organ would have properties that the individual cells do not have on their own. And then it says up here, community structure is an emergent property of an ecosystem. Community structure is the food web, the way matter is recycled in the community and the way energy flows in the community, the fact that there are sometimes keystone species in an ecosystem. All this are defined, so to speak, as a community structure. And all these interactions and the structure of the community is an emergent property of an ecosystem. If we then move on and take a look at the understandings and applications and skills for the next subtopic, which is C2, this is what it says. So there is a few more details that we need to add in when we talk about food chains and food webs. and how energy flows in ecosystems. So you need to know a bit more about it. We have already talked a bit about it, but you need to know more. And then there is something about how the climate affects ecosystems and how disturbance might influence ecosystems. And again, down here, this also has to do with energy flow in food chains. Yeah, and again, something about pyramids of energy, and again, something about climate. And there are two different ways of sort of modeling the effect of climate on ecosystems. One is a climograph and the other is a Gersmold diagram, and you'll learn about both of them. But if we first take a closer look at the whole concept of food webs, then what you should keep in mind is that a food web, as it said in the guide, shows all the food chains in a community, right? So we could, for instance, have a food chain that goes from the grass to the grasshopper to the bird. That would be one food chain. But we could also have one that goes from the grass to the deer to the predator up here. And we could have one that goes from this bush to the deer and so forth, right? So there are many, many different food chains that shows in this food web. This also means that food webs are more realistic representations of how biomass and how energy actually travels in this community, right, than just the simple food chain, because it shows all the food chains together. But you should also know that the limitation to sort of this way of modeling energy flow is that it only shows qualitative information. So it shows from which species to which species the energy is transferred, but it doesn't really show how much energy is transferred. So if we want to know more about how much energy is transferred, then we should take a look at the energy pyramids, and we have talked about them before. Sometimes they include the sunlight, but most often they have the primary producers, the plants, as the bottom level. Then primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so forth. And the rule of thumb is that only 10% of the energy is transferred to the next trophic level. Yes. And if we then again dig a little deeper into this, we have already talked about it, that not all the energy taken up, for instance, by this caterpillar is actually turned into caterpillar biomass, because some of it is not digested, not absorbed by the caterpillar, so it leaves or it is digested, but it's not absorbed, so it leaves the caterpillar in the form of feces. And some of it is also used, some of the energy is used by the caterpillar itself in cellular respiration, and hence is lost as heat, right? So what it says in the guide is the percentage of ingested energy that is converted into biomass is dependent on the respiration rate. And looking at this picture, if we increase the rate of respiration so that instead of just using 67 joules for cellular respiration, if the caterpillar used 77 joules instead, then of course there would be less energy available for growth, right? So the rate of respiration matters. And this is another picture that shows the same thing, because you should of course keep in mind that plants also do cellular respiration. So all the glucose produced during photosynthesis is referred to as gross primary production, and some of that glucose is used by the plant itself in respiration, and some of it is then available as new material, as biomass, and we sometimes refer to this as the net primary production. So this is what is left for the next trophic level in the energy pyramid or in the food chain. So what is left is what was produced in photosynthesis minus what is used by the plant itself in respiration. So part of what makes ecosystems different is the fact that the primary production is very different from ecosystem to ecosystem. So you could see that in deserts and in tundras, we have a very low primary production. And for instance, in a tropical rainforest, we have a very high productivity. And what also makes ecosystems different, or at least food chains different, is the fact that apart from sort of different primary productivity, the efficiency of energy transfer between the different trophic levels could also be different, right? So in this case, 100 joules is lost in cellular respiration, because this is used by the plant itself in cellular respiration. But if this was 150, then there would be less energy available in the form of biomass for the next trophic level. So if we change how much energy is used in respiration, we also change how much energy is available for the next trophic levels. And this, of course, goes for the transfer of energy from the primary consumers to the secondary consumers as well, right? Because if we change the rate of cellular respiration over here, or if we change how much is actually assimilated, taken up by the by, in this case, the caterpillar up here, then we would change how much is actually available in the form of biomass for the next trophic levels. And here we have two different food pyramids to sort of illustrate this, right? So like it says here, the higher the primary production, which is this level down here and down here, and the more efficient the transfer of energy between the trophic levels. So the more efficient energy is transferred from down here to here to here, the more energy will be available in the top of the food chain at the highest trophic levels up here. And this can affect the community in the way that that we could perhaps have one more trophic level, because there's simply more energy available up here. So in this case, we have an energy pyramid, a food chain with 5 trophic levels, and we only have 4 down here. And here is another example of this, right? So here we actually have numbers. So this is the primary production, and this is energy in the primary consumers, secondary, and so forth. And you can see that the numbers are different. And if you calculate, you can see that it's not exactly 10% that is transferred from trophic level to trophic level. It's sometimes a bit more and sometimes a bit less. So on the next slide, I'm going to explain something called the feed conversion ratio to you. But before I do this, I just want you to again have this picture in the back of your mind, right? That the amount of energy eaten is this. In this case, by the caterpillar, 200 joules of energy. And some of that is lost in the form of feces, some is lost as heat in cellular respiration, and only a small part of it is actually converted into biomass. And the food conversion ratio, or the feed conversion ratio, that's sort of the same thing, is a number that tells you how many kilogram of feed do you need to feed your fish or your chicken or your cow in order to get 1 kilogram of food out of it. So if we take a look at this table, then we can see that we need to feed a fish stock 2.3 kilograms of feed in order to produce 1 kilogram of fish that we can eat. And we have to feed the cow 31.7 kilograms of feed in order to get 1 kilogram of beef out of that cow. And the feed conversion or food conversion ratio, of course, depends on both how much respiration is taking place, and it would also depend on the assimilation, how much is actually taken, digested, and absorbed by the animal, and how much of the food leaves the body again in the form of feces. And this concept, feed conversion ratio, we can use that to assess which type of food is the most sustainable, or what type of food production is the most sustainable. And it actually turns out that insects are a very sustainable food source. We don't need to feed them very much in order for them to produce a lot of eatable biomass compared to chicken and pork and so forth. You can also see that the pictures here, for at least for the beef, varies quite a bit from the picture I just showed you before. And quite a lot of research is going into how can we maybe change the feed that we give to the animals to make it easier for them to digest and absorb the different nutrients, so that we don't have to feed them that much. Could we maybe keep a slightly higher temperature in the stables, or a slightly lower temperature, or whatever, to make them to lower the rate of respiration and all those sorts of things. So we can use numbers or tables for feed conversion ratios to assess the sustainability of different food items. And based on what I have just explained to you, you should now complete a worksheet called More on Energy in Ecosystems, and it's old exam questions on these concepts that I've just talked about. And I want you to write your answers in a Word document and then upload your answers to the table in OneNote.